I'm very glad to have you here in our developer community webinar series. And today we are having the webinar from George James Software, Enterprise Grade Source Code Management. And I'm happy to present George here and John Murray and CEO of George James. George, could you please start our webinar?
Thank you, Evgeny. The talk today is about enterprise-grade source code management, and I'd like to start that off by just talking about what enterprise-grade really means and what makes Deltanji an enterprise-grade tool for managing source code. And then we'll move on to a demo. My colleague John Murray will be presenting the demo of the product Deltanji and showing what it can do. And then we'll move on at the end to a question and answer section. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat panel. You should find on your screens a chat window that you can type in questions. And if they're some of them, I will interrupt John and ask him the question mid-flow if they're relevant. Others I will save to the end. So if you just type your questions in as they occur to you, then we can catch up with them at the appropriate points during the presentation. So let's dive in. So first of all, what does enterprise grade mean when we're talking about source code management? What are the factors that mean that you need an enterprise grade tool to do the job? Well, I've picked out half a dozen factors that I consider to be important or significant in this bit. So, first of all, an obvious one is if you're dealing with a large number of source code files. Typically, what we mean by a large number is well in excess of 10,000 files, more often in excess of 100,000 files. That's large scale, that's the kind of numbers that we see out there. And of course, for each file, you may well have hundreds of versions of those files. So we're talking big numbers here. So the next factor that you often see in enterprises is many applications, and each one using a different technology mix, a different technology stack. And you'll see here just a small sample of the kind of things that you might come across in a typical enterprise. Obviously, when you're working at scale, then you have lots of large development teams, so many users, and all the problems with roles and authentication and so on that brings to the table. So you have to be able to manage large communities of people, often trying to do very different things with the code that you're trying to manage. And of course, in a busy enterprise organization, there's always lots of projects going on, and quite often they're concurrent and overlapping, both in time and in terms of impact on source code. Another feature that every enterprise has is complex workflows. Nothing is ever simple within an enterprise, and workflows tend to get more complicated over time rather than becoming simpler. So the procedures for authorizing code before it can be promoted to production, for example, often get to the point where you've got multiple approvals to go through and things like that. So complex workflows is a very common characteristic of an enterprise. And another factor, last but not least on my list, is audit requirements. Many organizations are bound by compliance rules and regulations and policies and standards and so on. And the ability to audit the code and identify when exactly a piece of code went into production and when it was replaced by a later piece of code, that's often quite essential. So that kind of tracking of what happened when is really important. So how does Deltanji deal with these kind of requirements? First of all, it has a top-down perspective, which enables you to see what's going on across the whole enterprise in terms of how you're managing your source code. Everything is visible from a single control panel user interface, and you're able to get an overview of what's going on that panel. Many source code tools operate down at the command line, and they're very detailed focused, but not very good at the big picture. Deltanji excels in this area, and you have a view across your whole enterprise, covering all of the servers in your organization from a single point. Another feature that is pretty obvious but vitally important is the fact that it's a scalable solution. We scale up to many thousands of hundreds of thousands of source code files and many hundreds of users. So you need, as an organization grows, to be able to make sure that the tools that you're using grow with it. So we offer a very scalable solution. Configurable workflows, we talked about the fact that all organizations have workflows that need to be followed, and Deltanji helps with this by providing enforcement of workflows that ensure that developers can only do what they're supposed to do, and that each user of the system has only accessible to them the roles that they're supposed to have, and so on. So you avoid the problems of checking out code from the wrong place or working on the wrong version of something on the wrong server. It's all configured and enforced, and policies are put in place to deal with that. In terms of Audit Trail, here's a sample screenshot that shows some of the things that are tracked by Deltanji in a typical enterprise. And you'll see various kind of things happening, such as things being checked out and checked in and so on. And all that's recorded in a persistent database with timestamps so that you can see exactly what and when happened, what happened and when it happened. And then the other thing that Deltanji is able to handle extremely well is complex environments. And by that, I mean situations where you've got multiple application servers and data servers, a real mixture of operating systems, whether it's containers or cloud or Windows or Linux. You have to be able to deal with those things, and Deltanji is well capable of dealing with those situations. And obviously, for this audience, Deltanji provides full support for IRIS, Ensemble, and Cache, and pretty much all supported versions of those. And within that technology, then we support and understand how to deal with all of the things that go on within IRIS and Ensemble and Cache, whether it's sharding or mirroring or ECP or BI or whatever, everything that's in there we can handle. So those are the kind of major features of Deltanji that I wanted to highlight. Now just if we look at this diagram here, you'll see that this represents a sort of fairly typical enterprise setup where you have a development layer, a test layer, and a production layer, with multiple servers at each layer, performing different roles, maybe running different applications and so on. Over on the left-hand side, we show how Deltanji sits above all of this and is able to serve code to the development environment for check-in, check-out, and then propagate it and promote it in a controlled manner to your test environments, and when the time is ready, through to your production environment. And there's 4 facets of Deltanji that I've highlighted on the left-hand side. One is the change request database, which keeps a track of all the projects within your enterprise, and all of the trouble tickets and anything that that might lead to a need to make a change to some source code. The next item there is workflow, which is the configuration of the rules and policies that apply to being able to move code around within the enterprise. The repository is obviously the database where all of the source code is stored, all the multiple versions of each item. And finally, the audit trail represents the persistent log of everything that happened within the system and across the enterprise. So using this as a model, I'm just going to hand over to John, who will show a demo of how you might go through the process of checking out some code from Deltanji, making some changes, checking it in, transferring it into a test environment, testing it, and then promoting it to a production environment. So over to John.
Thank you. So I'm bringing up on the screens now diagram of workflow that I will demonstrate on our environment. It represents what George has shown in his diagrams so far. So this is the high-level overview of it. We have the development layer up here, an InterSystems IRIS instance that we're calling dev. And then in the middle of it, we have an IRIS instance called test. And at the bottom, we have an instance called prod. For simplicity in the demo, we just got one of each of those. But in real life, some of our customers have maybe are managing maybe 10 different environments, some of them managing as many as 30 or 40 different environments. So that's the scalability George mentioned. So this is the big picture, but in our story here, the work in the 3 different layers is done by 3 different types of people, 3 different roles. And the developer in my story here is a developer called Dan. Dan doesn't care about, doesn't need to worry about the whole picture. His focus is on starting work on enhancements or fixes within the dev environment, doing the coding, and when he's finished, checking that code in, saying that it's ready for tests. So Dan, at the beginning of a project he's been assigned, will check some code out from latest repository code into the dev environment. That entitles him to start changing it. It also gives good visibility to everyone that Dan is working on this piece of code, and that can be very valuable in terms of tracking what's going on within the code base. Dan will then work on the code here. When he's finished with it, done whatever testing he thinks is appropriate, he will check it in, and at that point, it will move on to one of his colleagues. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to look at an application that some of you may be familiar with, a demo app called the Coffee Maker Market. and this is the development instance of the Coffee Maker app. It makes use of an Angular front end. It makes use of REST to a back end, and the back end, of course, is IRIS serving up the information. Dan has been given a brief to resolve a couple of issues. One of the issues is that that the fave icon on this, and Dan never noticed this before because he likes a light theme. The fave icon doesn't display well on a dark theme browser. So at this point, Dan's going to say, well, let's see what they mean. Yeah, sure enough, dark theme browser. It's not really clear that the Coffee Maker's coffee bean on here is a sensible fave icon. So he's going to deal with that. The other thing that he's going to deal with is that apparently when people drill in to find the details of their coffee maker they're interested in purchasing, the image is broken. Something's wrong within the application, and it's not serving up good image links. Based on that, Dan will go over into Deltanji, and someone has already, in this case, created a change request for him about fixing the Coffee Maker application bugs. And indeed, on that change request, the two bugs I've just described are listed in a description of the details of the B002 fix. And there's a comments tab on here. Someone has said, well, what we want you to do is switch the icon to a file called faveicon animated.gif, which is already in position on the dev server. So Dan has been given his work task. In this case, it's been communicated through somebody creating a Deltanji change request. So Dan's going to start working on that. Of course, Dan spends most of his life working in an actual development environment, working on code. So at this point, I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio Code. And Dan is using VS Code with a couple of extensions plugged into it, a couple of extensions from George James Software. One called Serenji, which allows code editing and debugging directly into your IRIS environments. And the other extension, Deltanji, integrates VS Code with the Deltanji environment. So Dan has set himself up with a workspace that connects to the dev server. Dan is a multi-talented developer. He sometimes works on things in the EntsDemo package of a set of applications, but he also works on two other applications also managed by Deltanji here, a Marina application and a Vista application, which has a large number of routines. Some may know about Vista. Anyway, Dan's task is in the EntsDemo area, and he needs to deal with some problems within the coffee application. He knows that the homepage of the coffee application is index.html. So he can simply open that up here in VS Code. And here at the top of the HTML file is the place where the current fave icon is specified in the head block of the HTML. Sure enough, there is the fave icon that's being displayed, and he can view it here in VS Code. It's that coffee bean, and we can see that it's I mean, it's only designed as 16 by 16, but there's clearly an issue about the background color there. You can see that there's faveicon animated.gif, which one of his design colleagues has prepared and put it in there. And this is what he's being asked to replace it with. In this case, it's an animated favicon in an animated GIF file. So he's going to make a code change to make that happen. And as he makes the change, he can go and see that the change applies in his environment. He also is going to fix the problem with the broken link, and he has done a bit of research before starting to make the fix here. He's done some debugging In fact, he's used Syrengy to do the debugging, and he's determined that that the issue is in the CoffeeMaker REST server class, where there's a class method get CoffeeMaker info, and in that there's a piece of code that is appending a .png extension onto the end of the image tag before it sends that back in the JSON. That turns out it's a misinterpretation of the spec. The database already has file extensions on there, so he shouldn't have that line of code in there. So he's going to remove that line of code. Now, as soon as he tries to remove it, Deltanji's kicking in here in VS Code and saying, well, you're going to need to do some checkout in order to work on that. And we have B002 that was pre-created for us. So he's going to check it out on that B002. So he's deleted the line that's causing a problem. And then we can save it. The hope is that that's going to fix the image problem. So that's changing in relation to the image problem. In relation to the fave icon, I'm going to come on over here and simply change this to read. Again, it says you can't make a change until you've checked this thing out. Maybe you'd like it on B002. Yes. Okay. So fave icon animated, and being a smart developer, he's noticed that it's actually a GIF that we're going to use for the fave icon. So he's made his changes in the dev environment. Within VS Code, the Deltanji integration is tracking that and is saying, for B002, you've changed 2 files. They are available, ready for you to do the check-in. He's not all that reckless as a developer, so he's actually going to go back to the application and see whether the change he made has resolved the problem. So page reload, nice. My broken image is no longer broken. My my fave icon is now working on the top here. So Dan says, right, I've done the B002 project. Back here in VS Code, he can simply perform the check-in. And the check-in is doing what was defined in the Deltanji workflow here, saying that is moving the code forward to the ready for test location. So at that point, Dan's finished his part of the work. Okay, so now I'm going to take us over to take a look at what the tester in this environment does. The tester is called Tim, and Tim cares about the middle tier within the workflow. He watches what arrives in ready for test, decides which pieces of work he's going to test, transfers them into the test environment, does the actual testing, and then either passes the change as being ready for production or fails the change, which is to send it back to dev. So Tim, being a diligent tester, is going to first of all start off with CoffeeMaker before he's started, before he's applied Dan's fix, and he's going to verify that that the fave icons are hard to read, and that when I drill in onto an object, a coffee machine, we've got a broken icon. The test environment here we have set up with 2 instances of the test layer. We've got this one on an environment called test, and we have this one on an environment called test2. And the technical reason for this on our demo setup is that the test2 environment is testing a newer version of InterSystems IRIS. So this organization is making sure that CoffeeMaker is going to work successfully when they upgrade from 2019.1 to 2020.1. But in this particular case, we've still got the the software on that. Tim, the tester, in his Deltanji view.
John, we've got a question coming in about how the change requests are integrated with Deltanji. I think, if I understand this now, they're saying they're using a service for change requests and want to know how to integrate that with Deltanji.
Okay, yes. A number of our sites use connect Deltanji's change request capability with external ticketing systems. I know I can think of a site that has a remedy ticket tracking system. The remedy system populates Deltanji with change requests. We have other sites doing similar with their own defect tracking and project management software. But for organizations who don't already have something in place, you can easily use Deltanji's built-in capability of assigning numbers on configured types of change requests, and that you have great control over. But it's a good question. Thank you.
Amit, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Hi, this is Amit from Bay State Health. Yeah, this is kind of so. Like in our case, we are using ServiceNow ticketing system, which we can use to control all our change requests. So that means we can use those APIs to integrate that with the Deltanji.
That's correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that give me an answer. Thank you.
Okay. So our tester, Tim, the tester here, looks into ready for test, and there are two work items in there. There's B002, the fix for coffee maker bugs, and there's an enhancement to do with a different area of the ENS demo application. Tim is only interested at this point in testing B002, so he can be selective about what he takes into the test environment. He's going to take B002 and put it into test at this point. So in it goes, and then at this point he will go back over into the coffee makers application where he had the broken link, refresh the page, and the link is no longer broken. The image is there. So Dan has definitely fixed that problem. But what's happened to the fave icon? Actually, things seem to have got worse here. There used to be a fave icon. Now there's no fave icon at all. Tester Tim's conclusion is that of the work that's in test, in this case B002, B002 has failed testing. So he's going to say, I'm going to fail B002. And off he goes. He's failed it. The work job can now go back to Dan. So I'll switch back to Dan's perspective of things. He is on here. Dan can go back into his Deltanji and look at what's currently checked out. B002, which he thought he'd checked in, B002 has come back to him. And the audit trail of it has a piece of information in there saying that that tester Tim has failed B002 back here. Tim has no doubt also sent down a message or possibly added something into the change request to say what the problem was. Yeah, a good question there. I just caught sight of that, Amit. Do things revert back? Well, in our demo setup here, no, they don't revert back automatically. There is a capability for Tim to decide that he wants to roll back, basically back out the change that that Dan has provided. But in this case, Tim is being pragmatic about it. He's saying it hasn't actually broken the app beyond functioning. It's a cosmetic break. So it's not necessary, in his view, to reset the test environment. But even this workflow, relatively simple for demo purposes, gives Tim the ability to roll the code back. So Dan is going to try and sort this problem out, and he's going to tackle this by going back to his development environment. He's a bit puzzled, of course, because the thing worked for him, and he's not sure why there's an issue there. So he's going to, in my story here, he's going to open another VS Code workspace, which he created ahead of time, which gives him a view into the, sorry, I just lost it on my focus there. Code. This one. It gives him a view into his dev area where he did the work on the coffee maker class, and also where he's got his fav icon animated. But it also gives him a read-only view into the test area. Read-only because nobody's allowed to edit code in the test environment. The test environment is controlled, managed by the testers. But Dan is allowed to go and view code in there, and he can go and look in there, and immediately it becomes clear to him what the problem is. In his race to get the code out there before the end of the day, he's forgotten to register that favicon animated.gif is now a part of the application. So when he transferred the change forward, he didn't send the related icon. So he's going to deal with that, and in this case, he's going to go and deal with that in the Deltanji web UI. He will go into his components view of the dev area, look at the binary components in the coffee section, and sure enough, favicon animated is in a status called unregistered. That is, it's physically there, but not yet managed by Deltanji. So he's going to register it at this point, register it, and unsurprisingly, it's registered associated with the fixing of the coffee maker app bugs, B002. So that's all he needs to do. And now if I refresh this page, favicon animated is now in the green state. But he's also realized that actually favicon.ico is no longer needed within the application. It's redundant now. It's been taken out of the reference from the home page. So he's going to check this one out again on the B002 project. And at this point, you can see that the object that's managing this has got the component on there. He's going to unregister it to say we no longer need to manage the old static ICO file. He's also going to say at this point, I'm going to physically delete it because I don't need it in my development file system either. It's no longer being used. So Deltanji is going to give him a big warning. He's going to do the delete. He doesn't need to panic too much about this because the original version 0 of favicon already checked into the repository. So it's going to be okay for him to delete the file on here. So the upshot of that is that now he's got some more bits associated with the change request, 4 objects. So this one change request, B002, actually has 4 objects associated with it. And he's going to say, right, I think I've sorted it out now. I'm going to check that in. That pushes it over to ready for test. At that point, the workflow switches across to pick the right one again. I'll get the hang of it one day. So Tim, the tester, can see that B002 has popped back into his ready for test box. He's going to say, okay, let's bring that into test again. Go to my coffee makers page, reload the page, and we haven't got a favicon appearing on there because I had this problem when I was doing the testing. I need to clear my browser cache. So I'll just hit a big button to clear the browser cache. And now the fave icon, the nice little animated coffee mug filling up, is working. And for good measure, Tim is going to verify that the broken image problem hasn't been reverted, hasn't been reinstated, that problem remains fixed. So at that point, Tim the tester says, B002, I'm going to pass that. And passes that over for ready for production. And then the work moves over to the release engineering team. We have a releaser called Roz, and Roz's focus is that she deals with the ready for prod location and the prod location, which of course is the production server namespace. She will liaise with the end users of the live production environment, determine a time when it's okay to deploy the change, and then she will go and use the Deltanji interface, find B002 at this point, and say, I'd like to transfer that. The transfer is from ready for prod over to prod. As you can see that 4 items are going across there. Question might arise, you think, well, why is fave icon being deployed? Well, actually, fave icon itself, the Deltanji object, is being deployed in version 1. But the key factor about the version 1 object is that it has no components associated with it. So Deltanji is propagating the deletion of it. So the predecessor version 0, in its active locations, in library, it managed fave icon file. The version 1 object, when we look at that one, it has no components on it. So Deltanji, as well as propagating the new animated icon, is also propagating the deleting of the one that is now redundant. So the production environment is being cleaned up of obsolete code as well. And for the final check, Roz will verify that the fave icon is appearing now, and that drilling into a machine gives an image of the machine. Okay, so that's taken the software all the way through the demo, and at this point, I think I should hand it back over to George.
Okay, thank you, John. So thank you. We saw there a demo of a typical workflow day in the life of a programmer, fixing a bug, putting it into testing, the test failing because the programmer didn't do his job properly. So then transferring the request back to the programmer, him fixing it using quite a complicated operation of adding a new component and removing an old file that's redundant, and then propagating that through to testing where it retested successfully, and then finally promoting it back into production. So just to recap or to wrap up here, Deltanji is an enterprise class source code control tool. It works with IRIS, Ensemble, and Cache, all supported versions. So whatever you're using, you can use Deltanji with it. We offer a solo edition, which is a free download from this URL. And that's a single user pre-configured version of Deltanji, which is quick to get going with and gives you a good feel for the capabilities, and is eminently usable for small personal projects. The Enterprise Edition, which is what John was demonstrating, has more features and more extensibility. And if you want to have a look at that and get an evaluation copy and talk about how it can be, how it would work in your environment, then send us an email at info@georgejames.com and we'll help you get started with that. So that's it. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? If you've got questions, please type them into the chat window. Let me just look back and see if there were any questions. There was a question about Syrengy. Essentially, what is Syrengy and how does that fit with Deltanji? I think the answer to that is that Syrengy is a debugger which works with Visual Studio Code, and it enables you to do fairly advanced debugging with Visual Studio Code. It's very compatible with Deltanji, obviously, but it is a separate product. And is available from our website or from the Visual Studio Code marketplace or from the developer community thing, which Evgeny, I've forgotten the name of it. Evgeny, what's it called?
Open Exchange.
That's the thing. Thank you. So if you want to have a go with Syrengy, that's a very useful tool. And there was a question about the audit trail in relation to production classes. Deltanji will track everything that is done. So if you make a change to your production class and it is and your production class is managed under source control, then Deltanji will record information about that in its audit trail. Yes, and that was a question from Irina, I think. No, it was from Amir. Sorry, Amir.
Question from Amit I resend.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So do we have any more questions?
We have a question from Amit again. How we control read-write access in Deltanji for developers?
Okay. Essentially, when you if you change something, then Deltanji will attempt to check it out for you and give you write access to it. If it's not checked out, then you don't have write access. You can't edit it. It's read only.
Yeah, and again, in this tool, can we deploy from dev to prod directly?
In the demonstration that John gave, the configuration was set up so that you couldn't do that. You had to go via test. If you configure it with rules that say that you're allowed to do that, then yes, you could arrange for that to happen. But generally, that's not good practice. It's always best to go via a test environment and ensure that the test step hasn't been skipped.
I'd sort of augment that by saying that we do have many sites where they configure dev test prod as being the normal workflow for controlled enhancements or controlled bug fixes, but they may well implement what they think of as a fast track or emergency fix workflow that allows production critical issues to be resolved in a controlled and audited fashion without taking it through the normal pathways. And such workflows will then also be such that when the crisis is over, the patch that was done using the fast track gets integrated, gets merged into the main code base, so that when in future a regular enhancement or bug fix comes through, you don't find that an urgent fix that was done effectively quickly into prod, you'll find it won't get overwritten by by the official version, as it were.
Okay, thank you, John. Actually, I have a question. May I?
Mhm.
So I saw the UI of Deltanji, and is it a web application or it's a client or software for some operational system? So
It's a web application. I was using Firefox. In this case, it was Firefox on a Linux desktop, so but it's compatible with Chrome, with Edge, with Internet Explorer. We even have occasionally we have people saying they've tried it out on Safari.
so it's independent from, so it's cross-platform, right?
Yes.
And another question. So you showed the demo how Deltanji works with Syrengy and in VS Code. And I'm curious if Deltanji is compatible with Studio, Atelier, and VS Code object script.
It's already compatible with Studio and Atelier, and also compatible with the portal editors. So if you're doing interop work and editing stuff through the interop section of IRIS Portal, Deltanji is integrated with those editors, and we are in the process of integrating it with the InterSystems object script extension for Visual Studio Code as an alternative to using the Syrengy extension.
Okay, thank you, John. So do we have any more questions? We have thanks from Wart Debugger. So Wart is here. Hi, Wart. And actually we don't have any more questions now, but you're very welcome to ask your questions on developer community, because we will send this recording to all the participants, and we will publish it on developer community YouTube, and we will publish it in developer community announcement as well, and so where you can discuss these features of Deltanji. And also there is a tag, special tag of George James on developer community, so you can ask your questions there directly with George James. So I think we're good for today, right? And so thank you to George and John Murray. We had a great presentation today of enterprise-grade source code management with Deltanji from George James Software. Yes, thank you, John. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting the session.
Sure, and actually stay tuned. Next week we will have the next developer community series webinars where you can find more about products and solutions which partners of InterSystems produce, which helps you to be successful with InterSystems IRIS and other InterSystems products. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend, and see you again on developer community and in our webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.